This podcast was produced from a webinar. For a more interactive experience with visuals, visit advancedmanufacturing.org/webinars. Welcome to another SME Media webinar. I'm Carrie Gitter, Associate Editor. Today we'll be exploring the topic, Unlocking the Environmental Benefits of Aluminum in BEVs. This presentation is sponsored by Drive Aluminum, and we're joined today by Tom Leary, Director of Technology at the Aluminum Association, Marshall Wang, Senior Manager of Sustainability Programs at the Aluminum Association, and Andreas Afseth, Technical Director of Global Automotive at Constellium. Now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Tom. Welcome. We're happy to have you join us today.
Thank you, Carrie. So as we begin, I would like to just spend a moment to introduce everyone to the Aluminum Association. We are the only U.S. association that supports the full value chain in aluminum, from mining and smelting to value-added products and to recycling, including suppliers to the industry. Comprised of over 120 member companies that represent over 70% of North American aluminum production and fabrication, we are the industry's leading voice in developing global standards, business intelligence, industry expertise, and sustainability research for our member companies, policymakers, and for the general public. And with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Andreas, who will begin the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom. And sorry, I'll go back one. Yeah. So I'll introduce the webinar we're doing today. Concerns a recently published study on the life cycle analysis or environmental impact of battery electric vehicles with different degrees of aluminum intensity. This study builds on a previous study that we did in the ATG, published back in 2021, looking at the financial impact or the cost of lightweighting BEVs, weighed off against the cost savings of reducing battery size and electric motor powers. So for both of these studies, we looked at two conceptual BEV design scenarios. The first is what we call the status quo. That's assuming that OEMs manufacture BEVs using a multi-material approach and using a material mix similar to what we found in benchmarking and teardown studies for vehicle produced in 2020. Compared to this, we use aluminum optimized version where an engineering company went through the bill of material and found the optimal combination of lightweighting with aluminum weighed against a reduction in battery and electric motor power for the best cost that could be obtained. We looked at different vehicle types, a small city car, a mid-size SUV or family crossover, and a pickup truck. And today we will address the small city car and the mid-size SUV. The costing study in 2021 was done by the engineering service provider FEV, which is one of the leading ESPs in automotive industry, while the environmental study published this year was done by Sfera, who is one of the leading companies for this kind of life cycle analysis. Then to recap the motivation for the cost study of EVs we did starting back in 2020, we knew at the time that EVs that were being sold contained roughly 3 times more aluminum in terms of pounds per vehicle than their corresponding internal combustion engine counterparts. This, of course, is very good news for aluminum industry, but we wanted to understand what is the likely evolution of aluminum intensity in EVs in the next 5 to 10 years to come. On one side, it could be expected that the aluminum intensity would decrease per vehicle as the value of lightweighting could be going down since batteries were getting cheaper and cheaper. On the other hand, we also were aware of the clear trend towards ever-increasing range of EVs, so that there might be a further need for lightweighting and taking weight out of the body in white and the components in order to compensate for the extra weight of ever larger batteries. We also knew that for BEVs, the choice of material is not really impacted by regulations or legislation. There are no fuel or energy efficiency or in-service emission requirements that force OEMs to go for lightweight materials. Instead, the material choice for EVs is made purely on a vehicle performance and an overall manufacturing cost basis. So for the study, we agreed with FEV to assume that OEMs will use a multi-material approach, and they will choose the material mix of steel, aluminum, composites, etc., in order to optimize the manufacturing cost of the BEV. Any overcost of lightweight materials, aluminum is a bit more expensive than steel, would then be weighed against the potential cost savings by using smaller batteries and smaller motors to achieve the same range or the same acceleration for the vehicle. The methodology of doing this study is not based actually on any single real car. We created virtual vehicles with a bill of material based on FEV's internal database of teardown and benchmark studies. And then from these status quo vehicles of different size categories, an iterative study was done by the FEV engineering team, where each part in steel was considered to be replaced by an aluminum, and then the cost impact and the weight impact of this was assessed, and again the full powertrain, the battery and the electric motors were resized to hit the same range and acceleration. So the study, which was published back in 2021 and is still available on the Drive Aluminum website, shows that additional lightweighting using aluminum replacing steel leads to a cost save and a value for OEMs, even as the battery price approach $100 per kilowatt hour. We also see that bigger vehicles with long range or high performance requirements benefit more from lightweighting than small vehicles. So we do expect to see a continued increase in the pounds per vehicle of aluminum in big BEVs, while for the small city vehicles, we expect that this will continue to be dominated by steel in the vehicle construction. Then there's a little shuffle here. I'll just try to explain the methodology using this example of the bill of material or a small part of the bill of material for a family crossover or mid-size SUV vehicle based on the 2025 model year. This is just a part of the list of the bill of materials, but where those parts that were identified as being in steel in the status quo vehicle based on the vehicles that were actually on the road and available for teardown analysis. The FEV engineering team were then able to choose a replacement in aluminum using different potential product forms. So they could choose between sheet and stampings, or castings, or extruded profiles. So for example, we see that for this vehicle, it was assumed that the doors were made in steel stampings, weighing in at 155 pounds for the 4 doors in steel. And They then substituted these with aluminum doors, also from sheet stampings, bringing the weight down to 89 pounds for the 4 doors. In this case, I think this is a 42% weight save, which is a typical value obtained when switching from steel to aluminum for parts like doors or closures. The cost associated with this, we see went up. It was just under $300 for the 4 doors in steel, and it went up to $436 for the aluminum doors. That's a cost per pound saved of around $2 per pound, which corresponds to roughly $4.50 per kilogram for those of us who think in metric. And this too is a typical value that's achieved when doing a steel to aluminum conversion for existing vehicles. For other parts like the battery cell housing, the part used in the status quo vehicle was a steel stamping. In this case, the FEV team replaced it with aluminum die casting. The weight saving, again, is in the order of 40%, but this time the cost per pound saved was significantly lower at $1.4 per pound, due to the better material utilization and the less waste you have when you do a die casting. So this is just to explain the methodology and how the FEV team went through part by part, looking at what's the weight save, what's the cost. Then going back to the sort of conclusion of the study for the city vehicle and the family crossover or mid-size SUV, we see that the status quo vehicle for the small city car had a target range of 300 miles. It had a battery of 67 kilowatt hours and an electric motor power of 121 kilowatts. And it had a relatively low aluminum content of about 368 pounds or 12% of the vehicle weight. Going through this iterative design study, the FEV team found they could take 680 pounds of steel out of the construction and replace it with roughly 400 pounds of aluminum. And the overcost of this in terms of material cost and the manufacturing cost was $380, but the optimized vehicle would have exactly the same range of 300 miles with a much smaller battery. You take 4 kilowatt hours out of the battery and you take 10 kilowatts out of the motor power, resulting in an overall saving on the electric powertrain of $459, meaning that the optimized vehicle was lighter weight with the same range, same acceleration, but cost $76 less per vehicle to produce. For the bigger mid-size SUV, the range was assumed to be longer, 400 miles, and you see this had a big battery of 105 kilowatt hours and a strong motor of 200 kilowatts. And here the FEV team found much bigger opportunities for material replacement. You could take out almost 1,000 pounds of steel, replace it with 600 pounds of aluminum. It cost $850 more on the material and manufacturing side, but you had a big reduction. You can take 9 kilowatt hours of battery out and 20 kilowatts of electric motor to get to the same vehicle performance. So that means you have a equally sized vehicle with a smaller battery, lower curb weight, and it costs $100 less to produce than the current status quo. So that was sort of the findings of the costing study we did back in 2021. And then we wanted to expand on this and see, when you do this change, what does it mean for the environmental impact or the sustainability aspect? And this is where I'll hand over to Marshall to go through the life cycle analysis study.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So I'm going to focus on the environmental part of the study, which, as Andreas has mentioned, was done by Sphera, which is a consulting firm life cycle assessment. So the environmental impact study that we use a tool. It's called life cycle assessment, or LCA. And this is a tool that focuses on system level evaluations of the potential environmental impact of a product over its entire life cycle. So that means so in the terminology point of view, it calls cradle to grave. So it's a full life cycle. The environmental assessment on product potential environmental impacts using this tool is very common today in industries and across market sectors. The automotive industry do this, the beverage industries do this, the building industries do this too. So this webinar is not a technical webinar, so I'm going to just mention several quick terminology to help you understand what we're talking about. The first terminology in the LCA is what's called functional unit. A functional unit is a measurement, a basis for a measurement. Like you measure weight, you use pounds or you use kilograms, so on and so forth. For life cycle assessment, it is not only a unit, but also a functional unit. So for a product, the key word here is function. The product has to perform a function. And in the case of comparative study, you have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So it's very strict that the comparative products perform the same function as it intended to be, so that you can compare with them. So in this case, it's a vehicle, but the functional unit is a transportation service that's provided by the vehicle over the lifetime of driving distance of 200,000 miles. So we're comparing, in this case, as Andreas has mentioned before, there are two types of vehicles that we're talking about. We're talking about a city vehicle and a family crossover. So the comparisons should be made strictly within the city vehicle and within the family crossover. You cannot compare them cross comparisons. And the second term that's useful for us to understand is the system boundary. I've already mentioned cradle to grave, the term that's been used. System boundary just basically means what's included in your study and what's not included. So over here, the system boundary is the full life cycle of the vehicle, starting from the raw material extraction all the way to the use and until the end of the life, when the vehicle is dismantled, recycled, or some parts of the materials are landfilled. And then the next terminology that's useful for us to understand is the geographic coverage. So different products in different regions have different environmental profiles. Over here, this geographic coverage is North America. That means the United States and Canada. We do not include Mexico in our study because Mexico does not have good data on aluminum and steel inventories. So the context over here is strictly the vehicles that are driving on the road of the United States or Canada. And the vehicles and the materials and the parts are mostly produced here too. And then the data sources for this study, Andreas has already mentioned the FEV, the engineering firm, has designed the vehicles. Then the Aluminum Association provided the aluminum inventory database And then the steel data is coming from steel and other materials, as well as the battery cells data are coming from the Sphere database. So the design overview is the foundation for the study. So over here, it's a busy table, but I want to mention several things. Some of these Andreas has already mentioned during his cost study presentation. What we are looking here is that, first of all, the vehicles, there are model years, and then there are different types, different designs. The one design is the status quo, the other design is aluminum optimized, and the status quo is more steel intensive, and aluminum optimized is more aluminum intensive. And then the model year 2025 and 2030 over here doesn't really mean that it's the reality. It just from a FEV engineer's point of view, at the time when the study was conducted, it was 2021. So this is just a future vision of the vehicle. One version is the middle term, is the near term, the other version is the longer term. So overall, the vehicles are, the weights of the vehicles are reduced through time and through the material substitution. The battery cells at the same time are also reduced. The e-motor size are reduced too, and the drive range in the same vehicle, in the same model year, the drive range is the same, but between the 2025 and the 2030, the drive range improved, as you can see. In addition, fuel economy has been improved as vehicle is downsized. So this is the foundation for us to perform the environmental assessment. And then over here is a material overview that's put into the graphics so that you can have a direct picture in mind. So as you can see, for the city vehicle, both years, the aluminum optimized vehicle has a lower mass than the status quo vehicle. And between the 2025 to 2030, the vehicles weight are further reduced. And also, if you look at the family crossover, it's the same story. So overall, the weight reduction between the aluminum optimized versus the status quo, if we compare them in the same model year, it's going to be 9% for the city vehicle and 5 to 11% for the family crossover. One thing to mention here is that there's further breakdown of materials in each of these groups. For instance, aluminum, there's a breakdown among different forms, whether it's sheet or extrusion profiles or casting parts. So there are mild steel, there are high-strength steel, there are galvanized steel, there are stainless steel. All of these groups are different in environmental footprint from each other. So there are further breakdowns. In order to see the details, you can later on download the full report, which is on the drivealuminum.org website. So jumping into the top environmental takeaways. So the study has found that because the vehicle weight are reduced between different model years, so as the energy consumption and the emissions. The first bullet point on the city vehicle, as you can see, compared to 2025 designs, the 2030 designs help reduce the energy consumption by 9 to 8% for the same material category. Either it's status quo design or aluminum optimized designs. And then the most important message that we want to emphasize for this study, for the purpose of whether aluminum lightweighting contributes to the environmental reduction, is the comparison within the same model year between aluminum optimized designs versus the status quo. The study has found out that the reduction for energy consumption is about 6 to 7%, depending on the model years. And the last point is that we want to look at the heaviest vehicle, which is the 2025 model of status quo, versus the lightest vehicle, which is the 2030 aluminum optimized designs. We want to see what is the maximum energy consumption reduction. The study found that it's about 14%, which is quite a significant amount of energy reduction. So the same story goes for family crossover between the different model years. There's about 2 to 8% reduction because the near-term model year versus the longer-term model year, the vehicle weight are reduced. And again, the key point that we are focusing on is the aluminum optimized design versus the status quo. So in this case, the reduction for the 2025 model is about 4% smaller, but for the 2030 model, it's about 9%. And again, cross comparison between the lightest vehicle and the heaviest vehicle, in this case, the reduction is about 11%. Now let's put this into graphics so that you can see it easily. So this picture is showing in absolute values for greenhouse gas emissions. So I want to remind you that the GWP here refers to global warming potential. GWP 100 means the greenhouse gas emissions have a global warming impact for 100 years, and it's scaled in that way so that we can have a unit to express the qualities. So in this case, as you can see, for the city vehicle, per vehicle, the overall lifetime emissions, CO2 emissions, is between 27 metric tons to 32 metric tons. So the emissions are breaking down by life cycle stages and by material groups. So the important message over here to take away is the first thing is if you look at the orange bars, they are much larger for both vehicle types. And that's the use stage. That's the vehicle charging and driving the 200,000 miles during the lifetime when the vehicles are on the road. So this is the biggest impact of the life cycle of the vehicle itself. The impact is roughly 60% for city vehicles, and for family crossover vehicles is roughly 50%. So this is the most significant part. And the next part of contribution of emissions and energy consumption as well is the battery cell manufacturing. Battery is a big environmental impact product. In this case, it has a share about 20% for family crossover because it's a larger battery, and then about 17% for city vehicles. And then the rest of the environmental footprint is basically the vehicle body construction using aluminum, steel, and other materials. And that part is about 25 to 30% of the overall impact. So as you can see, the battery and the drive-in really determines the overall life cycle impact of the vehicle in this case. Now, put this into a more busy and picture here. This is shown in percentages. Although this picture is quite busy, it is useful for you to understand not only the greenhouse gas emissions and the global warming potential, but other environmental impact categories. Yeah, so in this case, as you can see, the on each side of the vehicle, the environmental categories are expressed in different terms. GWP means greenhouse gas emissions, global warming potential. PED means primary energy consumption. That's the energy consumption. And then acidification potential, eutrophication potential, particulate matters, smog potential, and then the last one is called low water consumption. So these are all the entire metrics that we use to measure the environmental impact, so that not only one categories that are emphasized, but everything else are also emphasized. Again, as I have mentioned before, the use phase, the driving stage, is the most impactful stage for the energy consumption and for greenhouse gas emissions, and for some other impact categories as well. But there are other impact categories where the drive stage does not really impact so much because it's just electricity charging. So that's particularly for acidification, because as you can see, the battery production contributes most of the acidification potential for the vehicle during the life cycle. So for a study to be robust and to be trusted, we have to do what we call a sensitivity analysis. So sensitivity and scenario analysis focusing on some of the key parameters and assumptions for a study. So life cycle assessment is a modeled approach. That means that you make some key assumptions and the scenarios, so that you focus in our study on what you are trying to achieve. So in this case, these parameters or the scenarios that were assumed might impact the conclusions of the study. So what we want to make sure is to see if any changes in these parameters or in the scenarios can reverse the conclusion or can impact the conclusion in a big way. So what we did was that we focused on several parameters. The first one that we focused on is the lifetime driving mileage. So the lifetime mileage apparently affect the total environmental footprint of a car, because the longer you drive, the more environmental impactful it is. So in this case, as you can see, the top left hand, the total emissions increases dramatically, and it's a linear increase along with the mileage driven. On the other hand, on a per mile basis, if you look at the emissions on a per mile basis for that city vehicle example, you see that the emissions reduce because the longer you drive, the per mile emissions goes down. So the vehicles would have a favorable environmental impact if people use them more during the lifetime. So, and then the second factor that we focus on is the end-of-life recycle rates for both the aluminum and the steel. So we want to see whether the recycle rates would impact the conclusion of the study. So as you can see, when the recycle rates goes down, when the recycle rates increase, the total emissions go slightly down, but it's not a big impact in this case, because recycling helps offset some of the manufacturing footprint during the manufacturing stage. So the more you recycle, the less impactful to the environment of the product. And then the third factor that we focused on is what we call a low carbon aluminum for primary aluminum scenario. So what we're trying to find out is whether if we use low carbon primary aluminum as a material, whether that can help reduce the total emissions or not. In this case, what we have found out is that from a full life cycle perspective, the carbon intensity of the primary aluminum doesn't really matter so much. The blue bars tell you that the effect is minimal. However, from a manufacturing point of view, the cradle to gate point of view, it is quite impactful. It can help reduce the emissions by as much as 14%. The last one that we look at the impact to see if the assumptions can reverse the result is the charging electricity, the source of the power generation for charging electricity for the vehicles. We look at the coal-fired power versus the renewable energy versus the standard U.S. average electricity. As you can see, that when the energy gets cleaner, the total emissions gets smaller, and that's no-brainer because the vast majority of the impact for the vehicle is the use stage. However, all of these analyses, sensitivity and the scenario analysis, one key conclusion stays unchanged, which is between the status quo and aluminum optimized conclusions, you always see that the aluminum optimized vehicles has the lowest footprint, no matter which case, which scenario, or which parameter you change. So that means that the study is solid because all of these external assumptions and the parameters won't change the relative comparison results of the study. Lastly, the study, because it's a comparative study based on the ISO standards that the study is conducted, we have to get it peer-reviewed. So we invited a panel of critical reviewers. They are the third-party experts in the field, and their goal is to make sure that the study is in compliance with all the ISO standards. And they concluded that the study was solid. So in summary, aluminum built great battery electrical vehicles. It is one of the best materials to do so from an engineering point of view, and from our studies from a cost point of view, and also from an environmental point of view. So we can confidently say that it makes sense. So lightweight BEV body structure and components using aluminum to replace steel allow OEMs to downsize battery and the powertrains while maintaining the range and acceleration, which is the fundamental starting point that Andreas has explained at the very beginning that the FEV has did. And the cost savings from the battery and the electric motor downsizing can more than outweigh the additional material cost when you use aluminum to replace steel. And especially for larger vehicles with longer range. So the larger the vehicle, the longer range the vehicle, the more benefit that you get from the cost point of view. But I want to emphasize here, very importantly for you to understand, that the cost study is only focusing on the manufacturing stage. Unlike the cost study, the environmental assessment is a full life cycle assessment. So from a cost point of view, over here, we are assessing the cost points for manufacturers, for OEMs. So we're not we're not taking the study to see how consumers can benefit from it. Apparently, from our environmental study, which is a full life cycle assessment, as you can see, the energy savings using aluminum to replace steel is quite significant, and particularly during the use phase. That means that consumers will spend less money on charging. So overall, using aluminum to lightweight the steel-intensive BEVs save energy and reduce emissions. And from a full life cycle perspective, the energy savings per vehicle ranges from 24 to 56 gigajoules. What does that mean? That means it's a primary energy term. If you turn it into gasoline, which we all understand is about 182 to 424 gallons of gasoline, depending on the vehicle types and the design. If you convert that into electricity, it's about 3,000 to 7,000 kilowatt hours of the US average grade electricity. If you have a cleaner electricity like you have it in Canada, it's more than 10,000 kilowatt hours. So the energy savings is very significant. As you can see, if you're a consumer, you'd be happy to use these low-weight vehicles with aluminum construction. From a greenhouse gas emission point of view, the savings ranges from 1.4 to 3.3 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, depending on the vehicle types and designs again. So overall, the energy savings and the emission reductions are attributed to both the reduced battery size and the reduced electricity consumption for charging during the vehicle's driving stage. And then that wraps up my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Marshall. And Andreas, Tom, thank you so much. Did you have anything more to add before we move into the Q&A?
No, all good from my side.
All good.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, thank you for that insightful presentation. And it looks like we have received some questions from our audience. Quick reminder to our attendees to get your questions in while we still have our experts here on hand. So let's begin here with, it looks like on pages 11 and 12, the graphs extend below the zero line, and the attendee asks, why is that, and how is EOL for the various materials handled?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so this graphic shows the full life cycle. So it includes the credits that you get from the recycling of the steel, aluminum, and the battery at the end of life. Some of the other materials, we assume that they're not recycled, particularly for the foams and some plastics. So we assume that they have been landfilled. But the metals part, particularly steel, aluminum, and other metals, and the battery again, we assume that they get recycled. When they get recycled, you get a credit for recovering that material. So that's why you see a negative percentage. So it offsets the production phase impact. So this is a common practice in full life cycle assessment for all products.
Great, thank you. Another question here. For the material choices in the status quo vehicles, what was the rationale for assigning which parts where and which materials? And what were the real reference vehicles where teardown data was used?
Yeah, so the rationale really was real vehicles teardown data. So FEV produce or carry out teardown of real vehicles worldwide every year. So they had in their database quite a few BEVs with teardown data. For the mid-size SUV, I think a large amount of data was used from the Ford Mach-E. For the small city vehicle, it was the Volkswagen ID.3 that was the main, but they also consulted the teardown bill of material for several other vehicles of the same size. And then in terms of grades and alloys, it really is those that are in those vehicles. We did not make any assumptions on breakthrough new alloys being used in the future or much higher strength grades than what is currently used. It's just grades and alloys that are available in the market at the time of the study.
Great. Another question. When resizing the battery and electric motors following a change in the mass of the vehicle body, what was the methodology used, and what kind of drive cycle was assumed to be representative?
Here, this is also FEV know-how on how to model the drive cycle for different virtual vehicles. They used the WLTP cycle. I forget the acronym for that. It's the Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicle Test Cycle. It's a half-hour driving cycle going through typical use. So it has one part that's motorway driving up to 130 kilometers per hour, another part that's city driving at 40. With I think total average speed for the test is 46 kilometers per hour. So it's widely used for quoting the range of BEVs.
Great. Did the study make any assumptions about new alloys materials for either aluminum or steel? What were the different grades used, and how representative are they of what is currently used?
I think that's that sort of echoes the previous question on the. So yes, is the alloys and grades both for steel and aluminum used is based on what's available in the market in 2021. It does not assume any breakthrough or new alloy developments.
Terrific. A couple more questions here. What are the sources of data for aluminum and steel, and is that data up to date?
Yeah, so the source of the data for aluminum, it was basically the data that have been published by the Aluminum Association. We publish what we call life cycle inventory data every 5 years or so. The last report that we released was in 2021, I believe. But the data was a little bit aged. Although the report was released in 2021, but the data collection for data starts from 2016, which is way back. So that is the data, aluminum data that's being available out there. Although it's quite aged, but it a little bit outdated, but it doesn't really. It's still effective, and it still represent a larger part of the industry. Although in the recent 10 years or so, our industry has been improving in efficiency. If we do the next study, we'll see some improvement over there. For steel, it's from the Sphera database. And the Sphera database, I believe they contain the North America, which is basically the United States, steel manufacturing data. However, that data is not publicly available. Somehow the steel industry has decided to hide that data in a Sphera database. They have not published a report. So we don't know what year, but I believe it's also probably a little bit outdated. So for battery data, which is another important category of data, that is basically the data from the Sphera database, which is a combination of Sphera's own battery data and also some of the national labs, the data like the Argonne National Labs and so on and so forth. So it's a combination. For other materials, it's also the data that are sitting in a Sphera database for plastics and for other automotive engineering parts that are made of other materials. They use that.
Great. Looks like we have one more question here before we wrap up. What would be the impact of future material decarbonization? Will that change the results in any way?
So in this study, we used the current life cycle inventory data of the currently available material in the market. And as Andreas said, there's no consideration for future alloys, for future formats of the materials. The same is true for decarbonization. We know that both the aluminum industry and the steel industry and the other industries are improving their efficiency and work to decarbonize their materials. And in the future, certainly the material impact will be reduced during the manufacturing stages. However, as I mentioned during the presentation, when we do sensitivity analysis, as you can see that the absolute value, the total emissions of the vehicle may be reduced along with the different materials being decarbonized. However, the comparative advantage of aluminum versus steel is still there because it's a weight issue. And it is a weight issue, particularly when you have a large share of footprint that happens during the driving stage of the vehicle. So the materials part for the total emissions, as I mentioned, it was only about 25 to 30% for all the materials in the vehicle. So still, we see that decarbonization may contribute to the lower total emissions, but the conclusions won't be changed in this case because the aluminum car is lighter than the status quo.
Great, thank you. Looks like that covers all the questions. And if anybody has further questions, they can always reach out via email. I want to thank Tom and Marshall from the Aluminum Association and Andreas from Constellium for joining us today and sharing this very informative presentation. We appreciate it. I also want to thank our attendees for your participation and questions. We hope you found this content valuable and will join us again soon. Until then, remember that SME and SME Media are here to help you stay up to date on all things manufacturing. You can find links to our podcasts, webinars, publications, and news by visiting us at advancedmanufacturing.org. Thank you for tuning in.